This is the Blairing Out with Eric Blair show, and today I'm pleased to have iconic heavy metal vocalist Ronnie James Dio on my show. How you doing today, Ronnie?
Good, Eric. How you doing, buddy?
Great. Mario Lanza was played in your house when you were growing up as a kid.
That's right, yeah.
And that really influenced your singing style, correct?
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, being that the first music that I did hear really was that was going to be the initial influence, and it was. I had no idea that I had any kind of vocal talent. I only knew I liked what he did, and I loved the power of what he did and the strength of what he did, and just something that really touched me about him. I just thought he had such a marvelous, marvelous voice, and I had heard before that, some Caruso from my grandmother and grandfather who had these old scratchy things, not that mine was much better, but he was of my generation, so to speak, so I went, wow, this is really cool, and I knew nothing about rock and roll because there really wasn't a lot of it going on at that particular point. So he was my first vocal influence, and I think that's what shaped the rest of what I did, that his style, that operatic kind of attitude was something that I felt was hard to claim. You had to be good to do that. And so I wanted to retain that all the time in my career, something that was, that most people couldn't do well.
At what point did you realize, hey, I've got a voice, I can use this as a weapon?
Well, this was quite a while after I first started being a musician, because I started as a trumpet player at 5 years old. And that became the instrument that I used. I had no thoughts of being a vocalist. It was all for the horn. And eventually, when I think I heard the first singing and thought, I'd like to try that because I love the style, and that became rock and roll. Now, that's when it made a difference. Before then, I really had nothing but the horn to care about and to deal with. I didn't really become a singer until I first heard some rock and roll and thought, well, I guess maybe I'll try that.
And then tell me about some of your early bands.
Well, the very first band I saw, I went to some kind of, teen dance at the YMCA or the YWCA, one of those things, all that, those years ago, and saw the first band that I ever saw, and they were called Rick and the Rickettes. And no, it was Butch. They were Butch and the Rickettes. I call them Rick and the Rickettes because the guitar player was like brilliant, and I thought maybe he was the leader. But anyway, I was so influenced by that. I formed a band that night at that place, found a drummer. I was a trumpet player still then. Found a drummer, a bass player, was a stand-up bass player, and a guitar player who was my best friend. And we formed a band that night. So again, it was only to that point, when I got into the rock band form of it, that everyone else tried to be the singer. I didn't want to. I had a horn. I mean, you can't sing and play the horn at the same time. A bit hard. Everybody else could do something, but I couldn't. So eventually it became my turn to try to sing, and I did, and it was very, very easy for me. It was a very natural thing to do because of what I had heard, because of my musical training, because the horn being, a really, monosyllabic instrument, it's, no harmonies there. You do one thing just like you do when you sing. So I applied all those techniques that I learned as a horn player to vocalizing, and suddenly it was all there. It never was a problem for me, and I'll have to thank my mom and dad, especially my dad, who has a great voice, who never really sang professionally, but I would always hear him and go, whoa, pretty good. So I have to thank them, for that happening for me too. But it was not until I had to become a singer that then I started to play another instrument, and that was a bass guitar. So I was the bass player for years and years after that, and sang and played. To be part of a rock band, horn didn't quite cut it. I didn't want to be Herb Alpert. I wanted to be something else. But I was really forced into being the vocalist because nobody else was good enough. And then I had to make the determination: what are you going to do? Are you going to be a great bass player, a great singer, or a good bass player or a good singer, or passable of each? But one would have to suffer for the other. I decided after a long period of playing in the Elf days that singing would be what I was going to pursue, and so I did.
When did you realize that being in a band and having a great voice gives you power over women?
I never ever was about that, and that's really strange too. That I guess you think of front men and lead singers and think Steven Tyler's always getting all the girls, Mick Jagger's getting all the chicks, Ronnie's getting all the chicks. But truthfully, at that point, I always had enough female companionship to make it fine for me. But not an overabundance, because I don't think I ever really exuded that kind of an aura. For me, it was all about the music. I was always so committed to the music. I was a guy in a band, not the lead singer. I think that might be a little bit different too. There are those who want to be the peacock and those who want to be the engine. I wanted to be the engine. So I never really pursued that end of it. Whatever came to me, and if it was apropos, fine. And if it wasn't, well, see you later. That was not a problem. But it wasn't something that I was over-concerned with. My over-concern was about the music.
I think that's a strength in itself, is when you're very directed towards something, people see that and they admire you for it, and it draws them to you.
It does. I think, for me, really, the consistency with which I've approached my career and had my career go along all these paths has been, the one most important thing that everyone knows what you get with me. I'm pretty brutally honest, and I don't think that much of myself. I know I'm good at what I do, and I'm very committed not only to the music I make, but to the fans who have allowed me to be in this place. So I think that is something that has been very attractive, as opposed to being the peacock. And I wouldn't mind being a peacock, but hell, I don't look like any of those guys. They deserve to be that.
Tell me about the evolution of Elf.
Well, all the bands started with, from one place, and that place was the band called Ronnie and the Rumblers, and it all came from there. Then there were incarnations of different people within those bands and different names, especially since I became so much more the focal point because I was the singer, that almost after Ronnie and the Rumblers, and then it became Ronnie, DIO and the Redcaps, or Ronnie and the Prophets, and so on and so forth. So I was kind of catapulted into that place. I can understand why. I mean, in those days it was fashionable to be Joey D and the Starlighters, or to be whomever and the whomevers. So that was always cool. But it all began from Ronnie and the Rumblers, and that's where I did my first straight stage presentations and wanted to be something special and wanted to be better musically and wanted to be part of an audience. So everything started from that moment. Everything else was, what Elf became. Elf became all those parts. But Elf became one of the most important parts because it was at a time when we were better than we were before the 5 or 6 years of learning, and we were good, and we were doing so well from a playing standpoint and being recognized and covering a lot of states in our area because I'm from upstate New York, and we were now going from Maine to North Carolina to Ohio to Detroit, and covering a great area, and especially with the college influence that was in our area too. Played so many fraternity parties, and fraternity parties were really the breeding ground for bands that really made it after a while, who learned their craft. You learn it from having beer thrown upon you and doing all the cover songs and doing the things that those idiots want you to do, and meeting some great people along the way who have remained friends after 40 years. I mean, it was amazing. But Elf became all of that. But Elf became the most important thing because it was a leaping off point that led me from Elf to Rainbow to Sabbath, etc., etc.
The Blairing Out Show.